This video is possible thanks to contributions to the Existence University Patreon by viewers like you. Thank you.
The solution to the problem of gender. Induction through objective reasoning. In the last video on this topic, we left off with the conclusion that the real problem with gender is that it depends on who you ask. And the problem there is that everyone appears to have different ways of knowing what is true. We called this, which is typically called a culture war, an epistemological war. So the first question on this topic would be to ask, what is epistemology? The word literally means the study of knowledge, or the study of skill, or the study of expertise, from its Greek origins. And we will say that expertise and skills are types of knowledge, and simply stick to the study of knowledge. What is knowledge? Aha! We have already encountered our problem with gender hypothesis in real life. Asking what is knowledge on the internet is going to result in 3 or more schools of epistemology clashing over what the answer is. If one is possible at all, or so some of them may say. If I were to shut down each and every argument that exists today, we would be here for 1,000 years. It would be glorious, but it would also be a waste of time. The short version is this. All modern and contemporary philosophy today takes on this form. Holding this objectively incorrect philosophical theory as true, what is the result? And since that result does not match reality, what can we introduce to comfort ourselves, or introduce to discomfort ourselves? Instead of dealing with all this type of noise, we are going to do what we always do here at Existence University. We are going all the way back to the beginning, and will focus on the one philosophical issue that caused all of these problems in the first place. The question, what is knowledge? What is the nature of knowledge? Man has been attempting to answer questions longer than it has been attempting to question answers. And this is obvious for many reasons. One being that how or why would you question the legitimacy of an answer before knowing that the implementation of any answer at all to the solution does anything at all? It makes sense that one must first answer a question, then in applying it, find that one is wrong, and therefore questioning the answer next time. For example, a group of tribesmen out on a hunt encounter a lion, a creature which they have never seen nor heard about in any form or similarity. The questioning man asks, "What is that?" And the first man that answers says confidently, "That is just a different type of antelope." Given his confidence, the tribe approached the lion, as they would hunting an antelope. Having spaced themselves out to prevent the weird antelope from escaping, they circle in which time the lion sprints full speed at the smallest member of the tribe, carries him off into the savannah to enjoy his lunch. From that day on, every time the confident man answers a question, the rest of the tribe question his answer, as listening to him has been demonstrably a bad idea. This story example provides an insight into why it is that human beings question things in the first place, and why they question the answers to their questions. An insight long ago lost to those who call themselves philosophers. The purpose of knowledge. Today, the purpose or nature of knowledge, along with the purpose to most things that man has fought over, is lost or assumed to have never been discovered. But I am certain that every first man could tell you the answers as to why he wanted to know the difference between a tree and a lion, between a spear of good quality and a spear of poor quality, between a berry that replenishes and a berry that brings sickness, the difference between life and death, Long before we knew what knowledge was, we knew that when we opened our eyes, there was stuff all around. There were objects and people, and that a special characteristic about people was that they could stop living. Those people that are alive are able to tell us what they are feeling, but their bodies after death do not speak to us to tell us if they are still feeling things or not. And that lack of knowledge scares us. It scares us because the purpose of knowledge, of knowing, is to keep us alive. To quote Shakespeare's Hamlet, "To die, to sleep perchance to dream, aye, there's the rub, for in that sleep of death what dreams may come, when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have, than fly to others that we know not of? Thus conscience doth make cowards of us all." If you do not speak Shakespearean, Hamlet's soliloquy, to be or not to be, is saying that man is afraid of death, because we do not know what may come after, and according to Hamlet's personal philosophy, this type or ability to think about a possibly worse, or better, or ceasing for eternity existence after death, here on earth, makes us run to find ways to cleanse our sins, and to worry about other supernatural crimes we may have committed without even knowing it. That thinking makes us cowards, because these thoughts prevent our actions. Hamlet's goal in this case is to avenge his father's death by killing his uncle. But his concern is that murder is a sin, and thus his actions will send him to hell. And if he allows himself to think about such things, he will become cowardly, foreshadowing that Hamlet will act on his goals thoughtlessly, which results in his and everyone else's death. This story is one of many that stretch back through time. The fear of hell, or otherwise called the underworld or the netherworld, is a concept which is said to be as old as humanity itself. This makes sense, as even animals can use their perceptual associations to know that a member of their species or of another has died. Things that are knowable by perceptual associations would be at the basis of our concept-forming process as humans. So differences between objects, including the difference between a living being versus a dead being, must also be included. Not to the extent that we understand death or life, but merely that a difference detector such as consciousness becomes unsettled when a face stops moving for an extended period of time, a phenomena observable in infants. Man has always known that he can die, and unlike everything else that man can do, being dead is the only one he cannot inquire upon. In order to prevent dying, man has to use his rational faculty. In order to thrive, man has to use his rational faculty. The purpose for knowledge at the animal level is survival, and the purpose for knowledge at the human level is to survive and thrive. In either case, the purpose of knowledge is biological, hence how it can be said to have a purpose, and that purpose is to allow the animal to survive. The nature of knowledge is to mentally grasp onto the facts of reality by perceptual observation, and to be retained in memory for the purpose of survival. So what is knowledge? Knowledge is a mental grasp of a fact of reality, reached either by perceptual observation or by a process of reason based on perceptual observation. The problem is that this definition of knowledge comes too late. The confusion around death has made the subject of knowledge a religious or metaphysical issue, and the answers to the question, what is knowledge, and where does it come from, has caused every conflict mankind has ever engaged in. The various explanations of what occurred after death has been the guide to where knowledge comes from, and where it is said to come from is from a type of belief. We can use Socrates and Plato to demonstrate this. Plato, through the mouth of Socrates, has Socrates argue that the soul is immortal. In Meno, he uses this to argue that knowledge comes from the immortal soul that learned that knowledge in an earlier life. And in Phaedo, he uses the argument in reverse, claiming that he can prove the soul is immortal because knowledge is just the recollection from a past life. Socrates is not afraid of death because he believes in a philosophy that tells him that death does not really exist. This type of Vedic teaching of reincarnation was converted into the Abrahamic religions through Plato's world of forms, giving the souls a new life in that heaven. As inquiry into reality and theological arguments started to grow, the skeptical theories that popped up took parts of the religion as true, and in applying the skepticism to an incorrect theory, the results created paradoxes, which required solutions so as to comfort or discomfort the reader. This is philosophical noise, and this noise created two groups of people, which Ayn Rand classified as the mystics of spirit and the mystics of muscle. Let us take this point directly from Ayn Rand through the character John Galt. As products of the split between man's soul and body, there are two kinds of teachers of the morality of death: the mystics of spirit and the mystics of muscle, whom you call the spiritualists and the materialists, those who believe in consciousness without existence, and those who believe in existence without consciousness. Both demand the surrender of your mind, one to their revelations, the other to their reflexes. No matter how loudly they posture in the roles of irreconcilable antagonists, their moral codes are alike. And so are their aims. In matter, the enslavement of man's body. In spirit, the destruction of his mind. For centuries, the mystics of spirit have proclaimed that faith is superior to reason, but have not dared deny the existence of reason. Their heirs and product, the mystics of muscle, have completed their job and achieved their dream. They proclaim that everything is faith, and call it a revolt against believing. As revolt against unproved assertions, they proclaim that nothing can be proved. As revolt against supernatural knowledge, they proclaim that no knowledge is possible. As revolt against the enemies of science, they proclaim that science is superstition. As revolt against the enslavement of the mind, they proclaim that there is no mind. And that is the whole of their shabby secret, the secret of all of their esoteric philosophies, of all of their dialectics and supersenses, of all of their evasive eyes and snarling words, the secret for which they distort civilization, language, industries, and lives, the secret for which they pierce their own eyes and eardrums, grind out their senses, blank out their minds, the purpose for which they dissolve the absolutes of reason, logic, matter, existence, reality, is to erect upon that plastic fog a single, holy absolute, their wish. This wish is the feeling which they are certain they feel, and that certainty is their claim to knowledge. This is the problem with gender. This is the problem with everything in this culture war. It is my hope that at this point we have sufficiently dashed the mystics of spirit and muscle and have cleared the way to start cognitively fresh, holding no beliefs. Repeating. Knowledge is a mental grasp of a fact of reality, reached either by perceptual observation or by a process of reason based on perceptual observation. This definition of knowledge provides context that knowledge is a relationship between metaphysics and epistemology, that it is a consciousness which is perceiving reality, and is mentally grasping. It holds, it can pick up and put down, mentally, the knowledge it has. For an animal, this would be what psychologists might call episodic memory, such that a percept of a pre-perceived object and its causal nature, e.g. that it dispenses treats, are stored in memory, and are picked up in the fresh perception of the object, and they act accordingly, e.g. perform the trick that dispenses the treat. For human beings, this includes an active process of concept formation. Hence why the last video on this topic ended by telling you to go read the Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. So let us just punch out some definitions. Concept: a mental integration of two or more units possessing the same distinguishing characteristics with their particular measurements omitted. Unit: an existent, identified or classified according to attributes which a consciousness observes in reality, regarded as a separate member of a group of two or more similar members, e.g., 2 stones are 2 units. Generalization: a preposition that ascribes a characteristic to every member of an unlimited class, however it is positioned in space and time. Preposition: a grammatically structured combination of concepts to identify a subject by a process of measurement inclusion. Definition: a statement that designates the essential distinguishing characteristics and genus of the existence subsumed under a given concept. According to Ayn Rand, sense concepts in the field of cognition perform a function similar to that of numbers in the field of mathematics. The function of a proposition is similar to that of an equation. It applies conceptual abstractions to a specific problem. If you use the analogy that concepts are file folders, then generalizations are the main items which go into those conceptual file folders. Given all of the above, it is also important to understand the first line of Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. Quote, "Consciousness, as a state of awareness, is not a passive state, but an active process that consists of 2 essentials, differentiation and integration." End quote. So let's take these definitions back in time with us and start over. Let's be creative about this. And since we don't have a written history of when words started and progressed until the invention of writing those words down, let's just start with the oldest written text we have, the Epic of Gilgamesh, from around 2000 BC. Just from Tablet 1, we get the first part of the story, and can gain some insight into a world before philosophy as we know it. Gilgamesh is a king of a city who himself has a lineage and is oppressing his people, who cry out to the gods for help. The oppression to the young women is to sleep with them on their wedding night. The gods respond to the people's pleas by creating an equal to Gilgamesh, from a primitive man who starts out wild and is tamed. All of these words have something in common. They distinguish one thing from another. King, as opposed to the people. The king has power over the people. The people have no power over the king. In this case, power comes from Gilgamesh's strength and ability to beat any man in a fight. A perceptual association that animals can know, a pecking order, if you will. A city, as opposed to the wilderness, a place where people reside together for safety and commerce. The wild, a place without human civilization and has no securities to the dangers of nature. A lineage. Gilgamesh is 2/3 human and 1/3 god. He has parents, just like all living creatures. A perceivable event which occurs in all animals. A lineage suggests the tracking of whose parents are whose, as opposed to inanimate objects which have no parentage. However, this was a tricky difference, and in many cultures they adopted the idea that all things have a lineage, and constructed stories about gods who, through their magical existence, can birth rocks and air and water, and all those beings must thus also be like people, having individual personalities. The oppressing of the people by committing acts of force, acting upon non-consenting people, as opposed to treating them fairly and justly and with temperance and consent. And a response from the gods, from nature, from karma, a consequence to one's actions as opposed to actions never or not having reactions. Primitive man as opposed to rational man, wild man as opposed to tamed man. All of these words in this ancient text, which existed long before Socrates told us that a definition consists of a genus and a differentia. And in fact, Socrates only told us that because he observed it in reality. Ask anyone, including the modern-day philosophers and theologians, if humans are good at finding differences, and everyone will agree that we are very, very good at it. Except for those that want to be different, and in recognizing the difference between their views and those of their colleagues, may claim to venture that man cannot tell when things differ at all because he uses a different definition of words. Especially thanks to Aristotle and his rules for deduction, everyone agrees man can tell a table from a chair. But it was not until Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff did we have rules for induction. So everyone disagrees on how we can tell that chairs are chairs and tables are tables. Ask a mystic of spirit how they know a chair is a chair, and drill down to the essence of their argument, and they will get to a wish in a god that created chairs in a world of forms in his mind before creating the universe. Ask a mystic of muscle how they know a chair is a chair. Drill down to the essence of their argument, and they will get to a wish to control reality with their mind, to become God. That the mental boundaries they draw around objects in reality construct reality, and that the fact that they can imagine an infinite amount of boundaries around the object, that objects must therefore somehow be mental constructs which flicker to life through the infinite possibilities of consciousness's arbitrary cutoffs of mental forms from the brain's constructed perceptual field. The correct solution is to bring back those earlier definitions. What makes a chair a chair? A chair is an existent. You can only introduce what if imaginary or cartoon chair after learning about chairs in your childhood. So we thus have a unit, and a unit is an existent, identified or classified according to attributes which a consciousness observes in reality, regarded as a separate member of a group of two or more similar members. Chair fits this perfectly. A chair is an existent, which is identified by a consciousness as having the attributes which are similar to other existents and different from many others. In trainable perceptual animals and toddlers, the identification of chair acts more like a name, a unit, than as a concept. As the child develops, he is taught the parts that make up objects, like how the chairs in his classroom have 4 metal legs, a plastic seat, a plastic backrest, and no armrests. They get homework to go home and write down what kind of chairs they have at home. The next day, all of the children in the class report back different types of chairs they have at home. If every chair is different, how do we know they are chairs? The mystics of spirit teacher might explain that God put the essence of chair into every chair, and we are guided by God to see it as a chair because of that. The mystic of muscles teacher might explain that it is just a name we made for the form the mostly empty space of quantum waves take, which we collectively agree to call a chair. The objectivist teacher explains it with the definition of a concept: a mental integration of two or more units possessing the same distinguishing characteristics with their particular measurements omitted. A chair is a mental integration of two or more units possessing the same distinguishing characteristics. For example, that chairs are existents, that they are man-made, that they have the purpose of being sat upon, that the sitting is elevated off of the ground, etc. The measurements of the materials of which they are made, the exact purpose of the type of chair, the exact elevated height off of the ground, etc., are all omitted. Omitted does not mean irrelevant or thrown away, but rather it means taken in, accounted for, recognized, but held as not essential to the characteristic. The chair is to be sat upon at an elevated height off the ground, which is appropriate for humans. It doesn't matter if the chair is designed to be 36 inches, or 37 inches, or 38 inches off of the ground, or if it is made of plastic or wood or rock. All that matters is we have a place to sit that doesn't make our legs fall asleep from poor positioning while we eat or read or write or whatever we're going to do. Chairs were invented for a purpose. We didn't just one day invent chairs, and a month later a clever man discovered sitting when he accidentally fell into the chair. Chairs were invented to allow men and women to relax, to not exhaust themselves to death, and over time to enjoy a comfy feeling. The children presented in class with this experience of learning that his classmates have different chairs at home, and having a proper teacher, will learn about the chairs by learning how to form prepositions, grammatically structured combinations of concepts to identify a subject by a process of measurement inclusion. This chair has legs. This chair has a back. This chair is for sitting. These examples that they may brainstorm up and write on the board are prepositions. They consist of a subject, the chair, and its predicate, which are other concepts. Legs, back, and sitting all being concepts a child learns by having, perceiving, and doing. The process is a process of measurement inclusion. These are the units whose measurements we will be omitting in the integration phase. The teacher presents the concept to the children first by identifying those predicates which the classroom could identify by discovery of a process of difference detection, and similarities by differences in the different differences, which is a process described by Ayn Rand called the conceptual common denominator, and defined as, quote, the characteristics reducible to a unit of measurement, by means of which man differentiates two or more existents from other existents possessing it. For example, all the homework chair examples brought into class are all different, and if all there was in the world were unique chairs, then we would never call them all chairs. We would also have to be chairs ourselves in this example. All the chairs are, however, different in tiny ways compared to the huge ways that chairs are different from the tables, and the blackboard, and the floor, and walls, and roofs, and lights, etc., etc. When the children were brainstorming prepositions for the chair, some of the results would be true for some of the chairs brought into class, but not all the chairs. For example, this chair is made of wood. This chair is very comfy. These prepositions were true for their chairs at home, but were not true for all of the classmates' chairs. A preposition can be true or false, can be based in reality or not. It is not based in reality that the chair example the teacher started with, the metal and plastic chairs, that they are made of wood. When it is true, the teacher tells the class that they have made a generalization, a preposition that ascribes a characteristic to every member of an unlimited class, however it is positioned in space and time. A chair is man-made. A chair is furniture. A chair has the purpose of sitting at an appropriately elevated human height. A chair is for one person. These prepositions are true for all chairs, past, present, and future. The concept chair, returning to the analogy of the file folder, therefore can have the files, the generalizations, man-made, and for man to sit off the ground with. Examples of individual, unique chairs are also added to this conceptual file folder, and therefore the folder can contain prepositions which are not essential to the concept. To organize the hierarchy of our conceptual file folders, we need to objectively define concepts. We need proper definitions. A definition is a statement that designates the essential distinguishing characteristics and genus of the existence subsumed under a given concept. So a chair can be defined by the essential characteristics we found by generalizing. Chair. A piece of furniture designed for the purpose of elevated sitting for one person, typically with a back and 4 legs. The genus is furniture, which are movable man-made objects for human living, as opposed to a chair being a fixture, like a wall, which is also a man-made object inside a home, but whose purpose is to hold the home together so people and furniture can safely exist inside it. The essential differences distinguish it from the items that are in the genus of furniture, like cushion, sofa, table, lamp, etc. By following this pattern, we can construct objectively defined concepts, meaning we can grasp facts of reality by finding similarities among differences, and in grasping these by perceptual observations, can mentally construct means of going beyond perceptual observation, by holding essential characteristics of existence in a single unit called a concept. A method of taking in reality and retaining it for future use without exhausting the limits of our animalistic perceptual associations. Each mental entity representing every entity of its kind by a process of unit economy, open-ended and ready to be added to, and, if properly formed, cannot be destroyed. So we have an introduction to our proper method of thinking about concepts. Let us finally return to the problem and solution to gender. The problem with gender is the definition. It doesn't have one, not a real one. If you ask someone who studies gender theory, they will tend to use the manner of explaining gender, or describing gender, or saying what it might refer to, but they tend to reject the dictionary definition. We will, however, for the sake of getting a definition, use Merriam-Webster's definition. Gender: the behavioral, cultural, or psychological traits typically associated with one sex. The genus of this definition is the behavioral, cultural, or psychological traits. Assuming then that this is a proper genus would suggest that there are behavioral, cultural, or psychological traits of other types of biological or cultural or psychological classifications. For example, race. So then we must also be able to find or create a concept which uses that genus but a different differentia. As a simple example of what I mean here, take our definition of chair and replace the differentia to get a different, valid concept. Chair. A piece of furniture designed for the purpose of elevated sitting for one person, typically with a back and 4 legs. Let's cut out the specification of how many people are intended to sit on it and make it 3 or more people. New word. A piece of furniture designed for the purpose of elevated sitting for 3 or more people. Why, that is the definition of a sofa, or a couch, or a Chesterfield, depending on where on the American to Super Canadian spectrum you fall. Let's construct a few from gender. Word 1. The behavioral, cultural, or psychological traits typically associated with one race. Word 2. The behavioral, cultural, or psychological traits typically associated with one culture. Word 3. The behavioral, cultural, or psychological traits typically associated with one mental disorder. Do any of these work? When we hear the differentia change, suddenly, at least for me, I am driven to reject these concepts as anything more than unobjectively narrowed and distorted versions of the definition of a stereotype. Stereotype. Something conforming to a fixed or general pattern, especially a standardized mental picture that is held in common by members of a group and that represents an oversimplified opinion, prejudiced attitude, or uncritical judgment. Is gender not a narrowed down, inverted definition of stereotype? Gender, the behavioral, cultural, or psychological traits typically associated with one sex. Stereotypes, a standardized mental picture that is held in common by members of a group that represents an oversimplified opinion, prejudiced attitude, or uncritical judgment. Gender, a standardized mental picture that is held in common by members of one sex and that represents an oversimplified, prejudiced attitude or uncritical judgment about behavioral, cultural, or psychological traits. Do you think I could pass this definition off at a gender theories conference and get away with it? I would think so, as that is what gender means. A better definition of gender might then be the behavioral, cultural, or psychological stereotypes associated to members of one sex. The whole point of gender theory, in fact, is to argue that the definition of gender, stating typically, is there because it does not apply to all members of one sex. The definition also does not provide a strong understanding of what it is that it is defining. The behavioral, cultural, sexual traits typically associated with one sex. So gender is the behavioral trait typically associated with women, such as cleaning and cooking. And in the case of social constructivism, especially in the 1940s America, is that what gender is? When a woman says she changed her gender, does that mean she changed her behavioral traits typically associated with women, such that she ceased cleaning and cooking and began automotive repairs? If so, then what makes this any different from changing your hobby, regardless of what the people that believe you are acting out of line with the world as God intended have to say? And if not, then the definition of gender is wrong. This is the true problem with the word gender. It is an anti-concept. An anti-concept is an unnecessary and rationally unusable term designated to replace and obliterate some legitimate concept. The use of anti-concepts gives the listener a sense of approximate understanding, but in the realm of cognition, nothing is as bad as the approximate. Observe the technique involved. It consists of creating an artificial, unnecessary, and rationally unusable term designated to replace and obliterate some legitimate concepts, a term which sounds like a concept, but stands for a package deal of desperate, incongruous, contradictory elements taken out of a logical conceptual order or context. A package deal whose approximate, defining characteristic is always a non-essential. This last is the essence of the trick. Let me remind you that the purpose of a definition is to distinguish the thing subsumed under a single concept from all other things in existence, and therefore their defining characteristic must always be that essential characteristic which distinguishes them from everything else. Ayn Rand gives many examples of anti-concepts which have been constructed over man's history to warp his thinking in one way or another. Consumerism, duty, ethnicity, extremism, isolationism, McCarthyism, meritocracy, and simplistic. The anti-conceptual mentality takes most things as self-evident and treats concepts as if they were perceptual concretes. Let's take a look at her treatment of ethnicity as an example. Ethnicity is an anti-concept used as a disguise for the word racism and has no clear definable meaning. The term ethnicity stresses the traditional rather than the physiological characteristics of a group, such as language, but physiology, i.e. race, is involved. So the advocacy of ethnicity means racism plus tradition, i.e. racism plus conformity, i.e. racism plus staleness. Likewise, we could say that we found that gender is stereotype plus sex, or stereotypes about sex, or sexism plus traits. Other definitions about gender are no better. Cambridge. Gender. A group of people in a society who share particular qualities or ways of behaving which that society associates with being male, female, or another identity. A group of people that conform to a stereotype associated with being male, female, or another identity, not related to sex. Therefore, we should have just said a group of people that conform to a stereotype. Oxford English Dictionary. Gender. Males or females viewed as a group. Also, the property or facts of belonging to one of these groups. Is that not what sex denotes? Second definition, gender, psychology and sociology, originally U.S. The state of being male or female as expressed by social or cultural distinctions and differences rather than biological ones, the collective attributes or traits associated with a particular sex or determined as the result of one sex. Also, a male or female group characterized in this way. The state of being male or female as expressed by stereotypes of one sex. Council of Europe. Gender. The socially constructed characteristics of women and men, such as norms, roles, and relationships of and between groups of women and men. The stereotypes of women and men. Gender is not a concept. It is an anti-concept. Sex is a concept. It is defined by Merriam-Webster as either of the two major forms of individuals that occur in many species and that are distinguished respectively as female or male, especially on the basis of their reproductive organs and structures. This definition distinguishes the difference between animal species which reproduce asexually from those that reproduce sexually, and would be the major form of individuals that occur in many species and are not distinguished as male or female on the basis of their reproductive organs and structures. So, as a hierarchy, we have that in the field of biology, animals can be abstracted into two different categories. Those that reproduce asexually, meaning that each member of the species can carry the eggs and or birth the offspring, and those that reproduce sexually, meaning only one of the two forms carry the eggs and or can birth the offspring. Males and females being the concepts that distinguish the biological difference in certain species' evolution. The exact biological characteristics of being male and female therefore depend on the exact biological differences between animals of different species, genus, family, order, class, and/or phylum. The use of male seahorses birthing the offspring of the female's eggs as an argument for not all females birth their young is not a valid argument. Seahorses evolve such that the female deposits their eggs like most fish. However, they do it in a pouch the males evolved to have as a method of protecting their offspring as opposed to leaving the eggs in the sand. If female humans laid their offspring as eggs and left them on the ground, and the men evolved very strong arms to carry the eggs around for 10 months, would that really change our views that females are the ones that biologically formed the eggs? And ought it not be the case that the measurement of where the eggs are planted should be omitted, as in all cases they are planted somewhere, and left with resources to help gestation? Most fish plant them in sand. Seahorses plant them in the males. Mammals plant them in themselves. And any genetic or physiological events which turn this situation into a, quote, could have been if not for X, end quote, situation, that argument is also invalid, as the not for X part shows the causal link that prevented a normal occurrence from occurring. Sex is an objectively defined concept. Man, adult human male. Woman, adult human female. The definitions provided here for man and woman are also objectively defined concepts. The genus for both is adult human. The differentia, the sex, which is objectively defined. Human is objectively and biologically defined. Adult, too, has an objective definition, as adulthood is reached by physiological processes, both physical and mental. Hence, why some people can reach physical adulthood, i.e., can reproduce, but are mentally incapable of reaching a mental level of adulthood and, therefore, cannot be held as an adult in a court of law. The solution to the problem of gender is therefore to stop using the term, especially if you are an objectivist, as gender as the anti-concept it is today is the brainchild of the social constructionists, and social constructionism emerged as a rejection of objectivism, a rejection of the fact that empirical facts can be known about reality. If you wish to talk about that which gender wants to be, and that which the anti-concept gender hopes to obliterate, you would be speaking about sexuality. And sexuality is divided into two groups, one for each of the sexes. There is masculinity and there is femininity. Sexuality. Sexuality is the set of psychoepistemological, psychological, and sexual traits which are manifestations of one's values and the views of oneself in relation to those values. The genus is the manifestation of one's values. The differentia is the set of psychoepistemological, psychological, and sexual traits. If we drop sexual, we get the definition for personality. Personality. The set of psychoepistemological and psychological traits which are manifestations of one's values and the views of oneself in relation to those values. The addition of sexual trait to gain a new concept is valid, given that sex is an objective fact, and is only important in sexual matters. As was explained in the video on objective sexual morality, sexuality, masculinity, and femininity share all the same objectivist virtues. And therefore, personality-wise, men and women are equal. The objective fact of sex affects only sex, but it is objectively valid, and its addition to personality is in regards to the aspects regarding sex. Given the definition of sexuality, the definition of masculinity would be The set of psycho-epistemological, psychological, and sexual traits which are manifestations of a man's values and the views of himself in relation to those values. Femininity. The set of psycho-epistemological, psychological, and sexual traits which are manifestations of a woman's values and the views of herself in relation to those values. I think that concludes it.